Hello, it's Toaster Party, and today I'm going to talk about what my picks are for the 5 best March of the Machine Aftermath cards for Modern. So despite the fact that this is a mini set, there's quite a few interesting cards for a lot of different formats, and Modern is no exception. So without further ado, let's get into talking about some cards. Starting it off with a few honorable mentions with Deification and Spark Rupture. With Deification, you get a enchantment for a generic and a white that says, as Deification enters the battlefield, choose a Planeswalker type. Planeswalkers, if you control of the chosen type, have hexproof. And as long as you control a creature, if damage would be dealt to a Planeswalker you control, and the chosen type would result in all the loyalty counters on it being removed, instead, all but one of those counters are removed. With Spark Rupture, for 2 generic and a white, you get an enchantment that says, when it ETBs, draw a card, and each other Planeswalker with 1 or more loyalty counters on it, lose all abilities, and it's a creature with power and toughness equal to the number of loyalty counters on it. So with Deification, it's basically the effect Worship, but for a specific Planeswalker type. It also gives them Hexproof, which is an additional bonus. So what makes this card interesting is specifically with Planeswalkers that make tokens, creature tokens in specific, because you can put down your Planeswalker, you can make some tokens, and it makes it a whole lot harder for your opponents to be able to deal with said Planeswalker. And if it's a tick up ability, it means that you can keep ticking it up consistently to be able to get it towards an ultimate. So it's more of a interesting card for doing some sort of fun strategy rather than something that's competitive, because I don't think that we're going to be seeing a Gideon Tribal running rampant through the meta. With Spark Rupture, you have a kind of opposite effect, where instead of giving your Planeswalkers protection, you are giving all Planeswalkers less protection because you're turning them all into creatures. So all the removal that hits only creatures now can also hit the Planeswalkers, and it also makes it easier to remove Planeswalkers that have abilities on them that make it hard to get rid of them, say like the Fairy Time Raveler. So at that point, they go from being Planeswalker to tiny creature. But the one problem with this is that in some cases, turning the Planeswalker into a creature might be a bad thing, because at that point, if your opponent has something like a Karn, you're suddenly being hit with a 7/7 on your following turn if you can't remove it. So they're both very interesting cards, but they don't necessarily have homes in the top decks. So let's move on to the list proper, starting with Nahiri, Forged in Fury. For 4 generic and Boros, you get a legendary creature, Core Artificer, with affinity for equipment. When an equipped creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, and you may cast equipment spells without paying their mana cost. This is also a 5/4. So this is a very big creature that can come down very quickly and generate a ton of card advantage. I'm not sure if specifically Hammer would want this, but I'm fairly certain that some other form of Stoneforge Mystic deck would want to pick this up, specifically because of the abilities that it has on it to gain tons of advantage. Because it says whenever an equipped creature you control attacks. So if you have multiple equipped creatures going at the same time, say stuff like Cauldron Complete, Batterskull, those would both trigger it. And also, it says that you can cast equipment spells this way without paying their mana cost. So if you're able to flip into those cards off of your impulse effect from the swing, you're able to just play those out for free. Very powerful card, but it doesn't necessarily have a home in the decks that already exist right now. So let's move forward now to number 4, Vesuvan Drifter. For 2 generic and a blue, you get a creature spell shifter with flying that says you may look at the top card of your library at any time. At the beginning of each combat, you may reveal the top card of your library, and you may reveal a creature card this way, and if you do, it becomes a copy of that card until the end of turn, except it has flying. So this is probably playable in some form of Reanimator Shell, where it can just flip the top card of your library and turn into something like Gristlebrand, Emrakul, or Archon of Cruelty. And even if it doesn't have haste, or if it's summoning sick, if you flip into something like Gristlebrand, you're still going to be able to get tons of advantage. Another upside to this card is that it is a 2/4, meaning it doesn't just die to bolt. And if you can get it to the point where it can swing and become a giant creature, you probably just win the game. So let's move forward now to number 3, Jirina, Dauntless General. For an Orzhov, you get a legendary creature human soldier that says whenever Jirina Dauntless General enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. You can also sacrifice Jirina. Humans you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. It's also a 2/2. So this has a very powerful ETB effect, and it can also be sacked for a very powerful protection effect in format where both are very relevant right now. Especially relevant with the protection effect because Fury is one of the biggest detractors that keeps humans from being a top deck, and this effect certainly helps. Though it helps a bit less if your opponent does have the ephemerate for it, because then they can ephemerate and still be able to deal with a few of your creatures. But still very powerful in that respect. So let's move forward now to number 2, Coppercoat Vanguard. For 1 generic and a white, you get a human soldier that says each other human you control gets +1/+0 and gets ward 1. It's also a 2/2. So it's another card that boosts the human strategy. It has the very powerful boosting attack effect, and it has a very nice protection effect for an aggressive raid. And it means that if your opponent does have the ephemerate for the Fury, it doesn't really make it easier on them because they still have to pay all that mana to deal all that damage. And as I said before, Fury is one of the biggest detractors from people playing humans right now. And this is a very good card to boost that, and they also are already in mono white, so unlike with Jirina, it's not really any form of cost to be able to play something like this. So let's move forward now to number 1, Nissa, Resurgent Animist. For 2 generic and a green, you get an Elf Scout that says landfall. Whenever a land you control enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. Then, if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal either an elf or an elemental card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. It is also a 3/3. So, yeah, any fetch land gets you either an Omnath or one of the MH2 elementals, or possibly another one of this. And on top of all that, it also is a Lotus Cobra effect. So, aside from just getting you that value, it's also getting you additional value and ramping you to be able to cast other spells this turn. So this is a very powerful card that I can see going into one of the different variations of the 4-color Omnath pile, because as I said, it gets you some of the strongest cards in the deck. Another thing alongside this card is that it's good alongside Wrenn and 6, where you can then guarantee that every single turn you're able to play a fetch land and then fetch the land, of course, to get the draw elemental or elf effect. And even if your opponent has something like Lightning Bolt, after you've played the original land, you can then fetch in response and still get the draw trigger. So it's a card that is pretty much guaranteed to always get you a +1 in value. It's a very powerful card. So that's all I had to say. Thank you all for watching. I hope you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you all have an excellent day.